Good afternoon. I'm Jane Hunt, Director of Education at Education Projects. We are honored to partner with the Ohio Department of Education to bring you Feed and Fuel Your Future, a virtual learning series, along with the Ohio Soybean Council and their education program, GrowNextGen.org. GrowNextGen.org is a website for educators and students that contains lessons, e-learning courses, and career videos, and more, all focused on the science of agriculture. Our goal is to inspire teachers and students to learn more about agriculture, Ohio's #1 industry, and to see the connections between science courses and agriculture-related careers. There's a growing need for workers in ag-related careers, so this month we've created virtual farm tours, virtual lessons, and career panels with folks in ag-related careers to help increase awareness of those vital roles. Today's lesson goes along with a virtual farm tour that we held yesterday on the harvest. And we're going to talk a little bit today about food production and the challenges that farmers face when trying to produce our food. This lesson can be found at grownextgen.org in the Smart Farming unit, and also in a unit that uses Ozobots to help understand how to try and solve problems in agriculture using technology. Just to let everybody know, farmers are not only busy in the summertime and at harvest time, but also all through the year. So this graphic shows you a little bit about what they're doing. They started actually right after harvest generally to start talking about what will they do next season, what they're going to grow, where are those things going to be planted, and how are they going to choose all of those seed. The next phase is in the springtime. Once the weather warms enough and the soil temperature is of the right temperature, then they'll start planting. And those planting decisions, again, there's lots of those, trying to figure out how many seeds to use, how far the rows should be apart, should there be interseeding between crop rows so there's more than one crop in the field, and whether areas need to be set aside for conservation. During the growing season, there are lots of things for farmers to do as well. They generally are scouting for pests, weeds, looking at applications of fertilizer and whether that's needed or not based on their soil tests and information that they've collected in terms of data. They might need to apply fertilizers if they notice that pesticides, if there's a problem in the field with a particular pest, to protect the fact that they want to develop seed at the end of the year. For pre-harvest, again, there's more scouting that goes on and trying to determine when is the right time to actually harvest, whether the moisture level is correct or not. And then at harvest time, which is really what's going on now across most of Ohio, farmers collect their grains and then decide, are they going to store them in their own grain bins, or are they going to sell them right directly to the market? And there are lots of different things that happen after that in terms of what happens to that grain. Post-harvest, then they need to decide, are they going to continue to sell grain throughout the year, or are they going to finish up with their entire harvest and try to get the most that they can out of the grain prices at that time. But they use the principles of economics about supply and demand, and whether they can actually store some of that grain and get a better price later on. So there's lots of different decisions that farmers are making all throughout the year. And it's not an easy job. So agriculture folks are definitely involved in lots of business type decisions. So this slideshow I'm going to show you today just has some images that we're really trying to get people to understand, again, a little bit about what's going on in the field, and if there are decisions that need to be made, but also so you can maybe gather a little understanding of maybe why your grocery prices fluctuate on occasion, and what's going on in between being in the field and buying that food in the grocery. So this, this photo is of a field that has been harvested. Again, decisions will be made about what to plant next year, whether to till the soil, whether they'll plow it or turn it over or not, whether there is maybe going to be a cover crop added to try and keep the soil in place and replenish some of the nutrients that were taken out by that growing plant this past year. Soil tests might be completed, trying to figure out the range of nutrients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium, the organic matter in the soil, and those tests then inform the grower about what's next. If they're going to plant a particular crop, does it need particular nutrients? Farmers generally rotate crops in fields each year so that they're not depleting the soil of the same nutrients each year. And we want to increase the microbes and the insects in the soil so that the soil stays healthy. So trying to keep that rotation going is a real bonus. So then we talked about the next thing is planting. Well, there are several different ways to do planting. And as I said, there's lots of decisions about seed selection. That's a critical decision for farmers. What crop, what kinds of seeds, whether it will be organically or conventionally raised, because there are very big differences between those two types. What inputs will be needed in terms of whether it's a fertilizer, whether it's, you know, how the planting has to take place. So lots of different ways that they need to consider how it might be planted. And there's several different types of planters. So this planter is a planter that has seed, this planter is a drill. Different planters are used for different purposes and different crops. So this is a drill, and this is a planter with planter boxes. So you can see those yellow boxes on the end. That's where the seed is loaded. The advantage of doing something like this is that you could put different seed varieties in each one of those boxes, or maybe half of those boxes would be one crop, and you could actually plant a different crop in the other half. So if we look at this photo, I just have a question for you. Are there, can you see a difference between what's going on in these two halves of the picture? And then what do you think is happening? So one of these fields was planted with a drill, and one of these fields was planted with those planter boxes, or an actual planter. So which side do you think is which? So on the right is the one that was using planter boxes in rows, whereas on the left side of the picture, that was a drill. Because again, you can notice there's no defined, I think I'm referring to that in the right way, because sometimes when we're on video, those things are reversed. But the one that has the defined rows, that was a planter. The one that does not have defined rows is a drill. I can't get my slides to go. There we go. So sometimes, obviously, farmers are dealing with the weather. Weather is a challenge. It can either be too wet, as it is in this picture, that actually caused several fields not to be planted. And that was in 2019. Early in the season, the state was so wet that a lot of fields didn't even get planted at all. But if everything goes well, then you have this area called emergence. This is my favorite time when I drive by fields and I can see the little seedlings emerging from the ground. This is an amazing feat that we've accomplished using just traditional breeding methods to determine and get hybrids of crops or varieties of crops to actually emerge within 24 hours of one another. There's a lot of variety in seed, and sometimes seeds come up you might see on a planting package that you put out in your garden or in your yard, it might take 3 to 5 days to emerge. But we want all of these crops in these large fields to all emerge about the same time. So this is something that's plant geneticists have worked on and have been able to accomplish, that all of the seed, generally of the same variety, germinates and emerges within 24 hours of all of them doing it within that same 24 hours. So it does take still 5 days or so for that emergence to occur, but the whole field comes out all at once. So that's pretty exciting. So if we look at this picture, what do you think happened here? We have some little seedlings, but they're very tiny, and you can notice that the ground is what looks dried and cracked. So that means that this was probably a low spot in the field, and these seedlings made it anyway. They survived, but that makes it really difficult if they're in a low spot, if there's extra water. We want the same kind of water conditions across the field, and we don't want them to be drowning in the field. In this picture, these soybeans were damaged by some excess water, and because that excess water gave rise to some water mold, these beans really didn't survive it. So that can be a real problem. The type of water mold that this was called Pythium, and in low spots in fields or continuously wet spots in fields, that can really affect the emergence and the ability for these plants to grow. So what do you think farmers do about those kinds of low spots in the field? Generally, they will employ tile, field tile, that they put in the ground. They're long sections of perforated pipe. They're installed in the field, obviously during the off season. Sometimes in the fall, you might see big coils of black perforated pipe in different fields that you pass that did have a crop in them. And what they're doing is installing tile drainage. It can be 3 to 6 feet below the surface, depending on the actual place you are in the state. Most fields around the state do have some tile drainage in them. They can be from 3 to 10 to 30 feet apart, and determining the depth and the spacing is dependent upon the soil type, the hydraulic conductivity of the soil, in other words, how does water move through the soil, and the outlet for the drainage. So where is that water going to go? In addition, there's a cost-benefit analysis. So if I have a very wet field and very good spot to drain all of that water from, maybe a holding pond or a drainage ditch that I can have an outlet to, then I may significantly increase the yield of my field if I get the water off of it. So there's a lot of technical information. Again, another career that's related to ag and food production is being an engineer and trying to determine how do we decide where we place the tile and where does it drain. So on this slide, we have 4 different sets of soybean growth, and they were planted at different dates. The planting dates are there at the top. And these beans were exposed to hail, not on purpose, I'm sure, but it was a hail event. And while plant damage occurred regardless, the drainage or the damage appeared to be the most severe on the latest planted. So you can look on June 7th and see that the younger the plant was when the hail occurred, that the more damage there was to its ability to overcome that. So again, on a different kind of weather event, we can have excessive rain, but we can also have hail here in Ohio, and that can cause some real problems. So as we look at the next stage, that we're really looking for this. Farmers are looking for growth, and they want to make sure that the canopy closes over their soybean fields quickly so that weeds that need the sun can't get sun, and they can't grow and compete for all the same resources that those soybeans are looking for. As we said, there are some issues that occur during those growth stages, and so this might be one of them. Growers need to pay attention to what's happening in their fields throughout the growing season. So this plant, actually, these plants were preyed upon by several different pest species. Here's another example. It's a little bit harder to see, but these soybeans were exposed to drought, and that actually occurred this summer. There was some wet weather at the very beginning of the year, but then at the growing season, but then the rain seemed to stop. So what they do, soybeans will flip their leaves over. So the underside of the soybean leaf is curled up or turned up. It's kind of hard to tell, like I said in this picture, but it looks a little bit different than that green growth that I showed you to start this section. In severe drought conditions, the leaf they'll close or they're clamped together with the center leaflets actually being sandwiched between the two outsides. Soybeans have a three-leaf or trifoliate leaf, and so they'll try to protect that innermost leaf. Drought-stressed soybeans are often shorter. They have smaller leaves due to a lack of water, nutrient availability, and nutrient uptake because the roots need water in order to absorb nutrients from the soil. The root growth will increase because the carbohydrates are shifted to the root growth away from the actual above ground plant. But once rainfall or soil moisture returns, then the growth will resume. But under severe drought stress, soybean flowering may even occur earlier, and that's how soybeans reproduce. They have little flowers. You may not have ever seen them because they're kind of at the joint of the stem and the next leaf, but they're beautiful, sometimes purple, sometimes white little flowers. This next slide is asking you to tell what the difference is between these two fields. So you can see the one field is pretty uniform, and the other field, it's hard to even tell where the soybeans are, where the weeds end, right? So in this particular case, we are looking at the difference being weeds. And perhaps the weeds in this one field are a result of not being sprayed or not being controlled with other pesticides of different types. But oftentimes, this can be due to genetic modification. Soybeans have been genetically modified with a glyphosate-resistant gene, which means that glyphosate, which is a pretty common herbicide used in Roundup around your house even, can be sprayed on these beans and they will survive, but any weeds will die. So that's been a real bonus for farmers because they have to use less of a pesticide. Like the farmer that has a lot of weeds may have to use multiple different herbicides to try and get rid of weeds. So that's one way genetic modification has changed soybean farming. What's interesting about that is that there's a lot of genetics obviously being figured out. And that's another career area for students who might be interested in thinking about agriculture careers. This is one of my favorite slides. I think it's a beautiful slide, but this is from the ground, taken from the ground. And that soybean field that you saw before has now produced pods. So the beans are in those little pods that are hanging there, sometimes 3 to 6 of them in a pod, depending on the variety and depending on how good the growing season was and whether there was a lot of water or not. But by this time of the year, generally, soybeans don't look green anymore, but they dry off. And as they dry, they are more of a brownish or golden color. and the moisture level has to be down to a certain percentage before farmers will harvest. And that's simply because the moisture content of the beans can lead to, if it's high, it can lead to spoilage or mold growth or fungus growth. So that's a big issue. And so farmers can figure out, most farmers can figure out just by touching the beans, how dry they are and whether they're ready to be harvested. So this is a harvester, and the head on this harvester is designed for harvesting soybeans. And you can see that there's a big chute that will take the beans from the combine into a grain cart or a semi-truck that might be following right along beside. We had a virtual field trip yesterday where we talked a lot about what's going on inside that harvester. And these are incredibly sophisticated machines that have a lot of engineering and a lot of computer software. As that farmer is able to harvest, they are able to tell how much yield they have, so how many bushels of beans they're able to harvest per acre. And that is an amazing set of data collections. So computer science, engineering and technology, all of those are in high demand in these equipments and equipment design. There is a grain cart, so you can kind of see how they can track right along beside one another during the harvest so that the grain comes directly off as after it gets through the combine. So we mentioned that sometimes farmers can store their grain. So that's what these structures are. These are grain bins, and the grain can enter the bins through these big tubes at the top, the pipes at the top, through an elevator or a conveyor system. So this actual farm has quite a bit of a storage capacity, obviously, because that's a lot of bushels that can go in those bins. And this is the rest of that picture. So any idea what happened to these grain bins? This was that straight line windstorm that came through this past summer in 2020. And it blew through Iowa in August and caused a lot of destruction to grain bins like this. And it was really pretty bad timing, considering that now, only 2 months later, they're actually harvesting and hoping that they can store their grain somewhere. So they were in a process. I read a piece on Twitter. They were in the process of trying to get those rebuilt very quickly so that they would be ready for the harvested grains to come. Here's another picture that's pretty interesting, I think. On the one side, you see multiple beans in pods, and they look healthy and they're plumped up. And then on the other side, they're kind of mangled. They almost look like they've shriveled and died before they even had a chance to fill. And you can see the different numbers of beans there that came out of those pods. So what happened to those are stink bugs. So you might have stink bugs in that, or may have seen them in your homes, but they really like soybeans. Pumpkins too, but soybeans is one of their favorites. So the interesting thing here is you can start thinking about how many beans it takes to make a bushel. A bushel of soybeans weighs about 60 pounds. So you can see that these beans aren't very big. So that's a lot of soybeans, right, in 60 pounds. In this particular case, if all of the pods that filled had 3 beans each, then there'd be how many pods or how many beans? Well, there would be 21, right? But the problem there is that there were only 2 beans out of those 4 pods, and we're expecting there to at least be 12. So if we have that kind of a decrease based on a widespread pest, that's a problem. So that's a big issue that we need to be concerned about, and farmers are concerned about, and they're trying hard to figure out pesticide treatment programs that will take care of the stink bugs. So again, this is what soybeans look like. You can see that they're kind of a tan color, and they have a black stripe across them, or almost, it looks almost like I don't know, you could probably call it a belly button. That's actually called the hilum. And these beans it's impossible to tell whether they were genetically modified or whether they were organically grown, or if they're food grade beans, because most soybeans look the same at the end of the day, right? Well, not always. So these examples of soybeans were traditionally bred. They are conventionally bred, I guess you would say. There were necessarily no genetic modification added, but you can see that their seed coat is a different color. You can also see that the hilum itself can be transparent, especially in letter E. You have this transparent looking hilum, and that's desired by different cultures. So I think that's really interesting that, we, of course, produce soybeans here in Ohio for a lot of other countries. About 50% of the beans that are produced in Ohio go to other countries. And Japan is one of those countries, and China is another. And particularly in Japan, they like beans that don't have a colored hilum, because they use them primarily in tofu and food products, and they don't want, they want it to be a beautiful color. So they're that kind of almost a pearly white, and with no hilum at all. So that kind of gives you a look or a peek into some of the challenges that farmers face. We talked a little bit about weather, particularly a lot about weather. We talked about pests and weeds, and a lot of those challenges can be addressed using sustainable methods. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about those types of methods next week in our as this series continues. So again, I want to point you to where you can find this lesson and the notes for this lesson. They're at grownextgen.org in the smart farming area, or the smart farming unit, and also in a unit on ozobots, which is about using technology to solve agricultural challenges. And I want to thank you for being here. And you can find additional resources like this on grownextgen.org, not just this particular one. But we would like to invite you to join us for the rest of the month in this ODE series. We are doing virtual tours, virtual farm tours, and then virtual lessons the next 2 weeks, as well as career panels where you'll actually get a chance to ask questions of folks who are in ag-related careers. So once again, I thank you for joining us on behalf of the Ohio Department of Education, educationprojects.org, grownextgen.org, and the Ohio Soybean Council. Thanks for stopping in.